Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Lora Cecere.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Lora Cecere. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights. And this podcast is really designed for the innovator that's trying to gain first mover advantage. I interview technologists and also business leaders to understand how they are applying technology to drive business results. Today, I am with Bharath from TraceLink. And Bharath, I'm going to let you pronounce your last name because it's a little bit intimidating for me. So tell the group your name and a little bit about yourself.
Sounds good. Nice to be here, Laura. My name is Bharath Sundararaman. That's my last name. I'm the general manager of the supply chain collaboration business at TraceLink. And prior to TraceLink, I spent 10 years at Merck KGaA based in Darmstadt, Germany, leading digital supply chain initiatives. Happy to be here.
So what did digital supply chain initiatives mean for you when you were at Merck?
Yeah, it was a lot of looking at how the supply chain was functioning and looking for opportunities to improve supply chain performance, be it the core KPIs such as service, cost, and cash. How can supply chain be of better service to sales? And how can, as a company, Merck be of better service to its patients? And as we all know, right, supply chain is converting raw materials all the way to finished goods. And there was a ton of opportunity to digitize, to innovate. So that's how I would classify all the digital supply chain work that I was doing.
Well, along the way of being an industry analyst for 20 years, I run into different people, and I know you were really deep into analytics at Merck, and then you came to TraceLink. And one of the things that I observe is companies will invest in analytics and enterprise applications and kind of reach the limit where they say they need to automate their network. So let's talk about what is happening at TraceLink. And I want to talk about a concept called network resource management or network resource planning, and the transition from focusing on enterprise problems to managing networks. So tell us a little bit about that transition from working in analytics at an enterprise level to TraceLink, what TraceLink does, and then let's get into network resource planning.
Sure. So Merck KGaA is a top customer of TraceLink, was and is a top customer. And I had a chance to interact with TraceLink a lot when I was at Merck. And what I realized as a data guy that I was, that TraceLink had built the world's largest network of life sciences companies, nearly 300,000 of them operating on the TraceLink network. And by virtue of that, TraceLink had a gold mine of data that was begging, for insights. And that's what attracted me to TraceLink. So my thinking was, rather than do analytics for one enterprise that is Merck, what if I came to TraceLink, and what if I could do analytics for 1,500 customers of TraceLink and the 300,000 partners on the network? And just as a quick context, TraceLink, as the name suggests, tracks and traces every link in the drug supply chain. So we're looking at drug movement in 50 different countries globally in order to comply with track and trace regulations so that patients like you and I, when we go to the pharmacy, we get medicines that we can trust. That's not counterfeited, right? So there's a gold mine of data. So that was one big lure for me. The second big lure for me on TraceLink is a word that you and I are both big fans of. It's the network. As I said, doing things within your four walls, within your ERP, within your company, great. It's critical to run your business with proper tools and platforms. All that is fine. But a lot of your supply chain happens outside your four walls. It happens on the network. You work with partners upstream, from the patient, for example, contract manufacturers, direct material suppliers, API suppliers, especially in the life sciences industry. And that's where I primarily operate. And also downstream, as you get closer to the patient, with hospitals, pharmacies, 3PLs, wholesalers. So all these parties have to come together as a network to serve the needs of the patient. It's not just what you do within your company. So that's what got me really hooked on TraceLink is, wow, if you have this network and you could have the network players work with each other, not just on track and trace, on any supply chain process that involves multiple enterprises, we could really accelerate this digitalization. And the more parties are connected to each other electronically, you cut down lack of information visibility, you cut down the bullwhip effect. So I could go on and on, but that's sort of the big two themes. It's large volumes of data that we could extract insights from, and two is the network effect and how can we connect parties on the network to digitize the pharma supply chain.
Well, let's give the audience a little bit of background around pharma because, I think pharma was jump-started by serialization mandates. And talk a little bit about the evolution of serialization in the pharma industry and the evolution of TraceLink, and then let's get into network resource planning.
Yeah, track and trace, the reason why it's a priority for any pharma company out there is four simple words: no comply, no supply, right? It's as simple as that. If you don't comply with the regulations, you can't sell products, because we cannot have situations where products are going to patients that cannot be trusted. So every government in the world has their own version of a regulation. For example, in US, you have the DSCSA, the Drug Supply Chain Act. In Europe, you have the FMD, the Falsified Medicines Directive. Russia has its own thing, China has its own thing. So every country is trying to enforce regulations to ensure that patients are protected. And that's what led all these pharma companies to say, my job is to make drugs that cure patients' problems. I don't want to be dealing with complex track and trace regulations and laws. I would like somebody to do that for me. I'm going to outsource that activity, that operation, which is critical to my business. So that's what happened. So track and trace has been government driven and industry driven, and TraceLink saw the opportunity and said, hey, we could help a lot of these customers outsource that headache and give us that responsibility. And that's how TraceLink came into existence back in 2009. And over the last 15 odd years, TraceLink has reached market leadership. I think in US, our market share is close to 70% or something. Don't quote me on the number. It's in that range. So we have large number of customers, and we've really invested as a company in being the experts and leaders in track and trace, so our customers can trust us to take care of it. So that's sort of how these two things go hand in hand.
Well, you build a scalable platform, and good for you, because many times people that try to do it inside out run into problems with scalability and multi-tier, because the pharma industry is not just an enterprise problem, right? You've got your third parties, you've got supply, you've got an ever-changing world of specifications. So good for you for responding to the need. And serialization and that authoritative identifier for product is a leg up for the pharma industry. I laugh when I look at, the pharma industry, which was mandated by compliance, versus something like food and beverage, which tried to get the voluntary adoption of GS1. Only 20% of food actually complies with GS1 standards. Whereas in pharma, we have the serialization, which was painful. I remember when it first came out, they're like, how am I going to do this, right? But good for you and TraceLink for, stepping up and building the network. So let's talk about the concept of network resource planning, because 92% of companies have some sort of enterprise resource planning. Has different names. It might be SAP or Oracle or Infor or an older system like Bond, but the concept there was really order to cash, procure to pay, and to be able to work on financials and HR. On top of that, many people would layer a supply chain planning solution, which tight integration of supply chain planning to ERP actually makes the organization pretty brittle, but we'll leave that for a different day. But people basically invest in that inside out architecture and realize that it's pretty limiting, because 70% of the impact of ESGs in the network, much of the compliance and the regulatory movement is in the network. Much of the opportunity for inventory management is in the network. So let's talk about the concept of network resource planning, because I would love to see this concept take hold like ERP took hold for the enterprise. And what is your view of what network resource planning would look like? The modules, what the functionality would be?
Yeah, we could talk about this for days, but I'm going to try to give you a short an answer as possible. So network resource planning, in contrast to enterprise resource planning, which, as you rightly pointed out, Laura, is focused on the inner workings of a company, running its operations, finances, and so on. Network resource planning is looking at the network of partners that a company works with to plan or do supply chain planning at a network level to serve the end consumer, which is the patient. So I would draw a strong analogy to what you've been advocating for, for decades, which is this outside-in planning. Don't just plan based on the limited information and knowledge you have within your four walls. Plan based on what's happening outside your four walls, because it has a direct impact. And that way you have more realistic plans. And at some point, we can get to a more responsive supply chain that can respond to patients' needs. So that's what the network resource planning is. It's not inside your four walls, it's on the network. It's not based on data that's weeks and months old. It's based on data that is near real time. It's not based on historical seasonal patterns of the past. COVID has shown all of us that history is no longer as useful, or our environments are not as predictable. So just making planning decisions based on historical data and trends is not enough. And the latency of the data is really important to feed into the planning engine, so it can make plans based on what's happening now on the network. So I've said a lot already, but that's the essence of network resource planning.
Well, many people think that they can just connect their network to ERP or enterprise resource planning, and that's sufficient. But the research shows that there are black holes in the data, that the time to move data from the network to the enterprise resource planning can be days, which creates black holes. And then there are lots of semantic issues. So we have an issue with data latency, process latency, semantic reconciliation, and also just the fact that much of our network is still working on Excel spreadsheets, and we lack a system of record. So we've been talking about networks for 4 decades. I'm an old gal. I'm a lot older than you. What do you think it's going to take for people to wake up and say enterprise apps will not solve our problem, and that planning needs to be outside in? That's a big push of mine. And what I find is people still write RFPs and push inside out planning, which is based upon history and enterprise data, which is stale and really not aligned with what's happening market to market.
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, before I answer the question, remember our first engagement conversation, I did think you were a 25-year-old, so you're not old at all, or you're young forever. But parking that aside, there's 3 drivers, I think that's happening now to push industry towards taking a network approach. Driver number 1, in the pharma industry, 2023 was a record-breaking year for drug shortages. It's not the record we want to break as an industry. There was nearly 320 drug shortages. For the first time, more than ever, there was an extended cancer drug shortage with cisplatin and carboplatin. Doctors had to decide which patient should get the cancer medicine. Patient A, is suffering more than patient B, so I'm going to ration cancer medicines to give to which patient. I mean, what the heck? This is ridiculous.
Horrible.
I mean,
horrible, right?
Horrible. What if it was our family members lying on that bed? Would we want to have that conversation? A doctor say, hey, I can't give this patient the medicine because somebody else needs it more. So that's one driver. I think it's a real wake-up call to say we cannot do things like we did back in the 1980s and get away with just the same old approaches. We need to think the network, because why do these shortages happen? There's many, many reasons, but one big reason is lack of visibility across the chain, because all companies are operating in a bubble based on just what they know. And when a shortage happens because of this lack of connectivity and lack of a network approach, our supply chains are 9 months, 1 year long. Manufacturers want to respond to patient needs, but they can't because the lead time is too long because of all the inefficiencies built into the different links in the chain. So I think that's a big driver that's going to make people wake up and say, how do we drive more collaboration and transparency at the network level? Because guess what? That's FDA's #1 recommendation to address drug shortages: better data sharing, transparency, and collaboration with parties on the network, not just within your own company. Okay, these are #1.
Okay, so Bharath, can I just tease out, did the
Please.
market change? Was there a higher incidence of cancer, or were there supply restrictions? What drove that gap? Because I can't imagine being a physician and having to play God, right?
Yeah.
It's like a horrible position for the industry.
Yeah, there's many reasons for shortages, but last year, exceptional number of shortages. A big driver was, manufacturing quality issues. Another driver was, poor planning because of inadequate visibility, pricing pressures. So manufacturers, pulling out of the market unexpectedly because it just didn't make any more monetary sense to be in business. So a variety of reasons is like 15 I can give you. But these are some of the themes. And I think all of these, though they seem not connected to each other, is all a factor of the inside out thinking,
Right.
because we're not operating at the network level. And I'll elaborate another day, but that's the crux of it, right? So reason #1, I hope I answered your question, is drug shortages and these, horrendous cancer drug shortages. Reason #2 is the competitive advantage. You recently put out a wonderful ROI-driven article. I loved it on why the network of networks. And one of the data points which you had quoted, which shocked me, is that companies that are outside in, that are connected digitally to the parties on the network, get critical business information 85% faster than the ones that are not. That's mind-blowing. I mean, imagine how much of a competitive advantage you could have if you get critical information 85% faster. That's nuts. And that's just one value proposition. There's so many other business advantages. And I think people are starting to wake up to that. And we need, people like you and me and others in the industry to come together to put the facts on the table on what is the money people are leaving on the table, because they think this whole network thing is some big complex machine. It's not. It's just opportunity waiting on the table. So that's reason #2, right? The one is the challenge, another is the opportunity. And I think the third thing is, after COVID, there's this big drive towards digitalization, because companies have started to realize that disruptions are the new norm. Pre-COVID, supply chains are already struggling. Let's not kid each other. You've been around in this industry for what, 30, 40 years. Disruptions are nothing new, but they're just at a whole different level past COVID. We cannot get away just doing things the way we did in the past. So that, I think, is also helping really elevate the digital conversation at the executive level. I am yet to meet a single CSCO or a VP of supply chain or a CEO of any pharmaceutical company that said, I don't care about digital or digital transformation or AI, or now the newest buzzword, generative AI. That's what they talk about all day, every day, because they know that's where the big opportunity is. So many, many factors. And one last thing I'll throw in, not as a TraceLink commercial, but just as an important point for me, is when I was at Merck for a decade, every time I tried to connect to a partner, it took 6 months and $100,000. Not affordable, not practical. Nobody's going to do it. I think that's another huge issue as well. If you go to a senior supply chain leader in a pharma company, their first answer is going to be, if, let's say, I'm trying to digitally connect to my network, the partners on my network, let's say I'm my contract manufacturer, okay? The first question my contract manufacturer is going to ask me is why? What's in it for you? What's in it for me? So that has to be clear. And two, the next question is going to be, this is going to cost a lot of money. What's the ROI? So it doesn't scale doing point-to-point connections between parties on the network for $100,000 a connection. Companies will take decades and blow millions of dollars and still not get there. But what TraceLink is doing, which is why I'm here, is we're using the same network we built for track and trace to exchange data between 300,000 parties on the network, to now exchange critical supply chain information between these different parties at a dynamically, radically lower cost, And I think finally, supply chain digitalization is now accessible to the common man. That's how I put it, because of the affordability and because the capability is already built and it exists. And I'll stop there. I don't want this to be a TraceLink conversation, but that's my passion. That's why I'm trying to come in from the network angle as you to try and solve for this undigitized pharma supply chain.
Well, Bharath, I'll tell the longer story and then get into the discussion. You had read my writing on LinkedIn and asked for a call. And then when I got on the call, you challenged me that I sounded so young that, I could have been the author of this. But my struggle, Bharath, is I wrote about networks in the 1980s. And, what happened is we went on this decade after decade of investing in enterprise applications, and people that don't understand supply chain think that it's a one-to-one connection and it's a linear flow. They think that it's my ERP to your ERP to their ERP and that it's a linear flow. They don't understand the issues around synchronization, that the average purchase order changes 3.5 times, or that, there's a need for many-to-many connections because of multi-tier supply, because of constraints, because of, the flows. And so one of the issues is I find even the enlightened managers are caught in a cycle where maybe they want to invest in networks, but they're in ERP upgrade cycles, which are very taxing for money and also resources, and that the people that have managed the networks, which are primarily EDI today, are retiring. So I find that where we're putting our money is not where the need is, and that there are very few people that understand networks. So how do we get from here to there?
Yeah, this is a loaded question, but I'm going to try and break it down. So first part of it is all about what's in it for me. That's been the historical blocker to network-based collaboration is, why should I do this? As a supply chain organization, let's look at KPIs that decide everybody's bonus from top to bottom, right? It's service level or OTIF, cost, and cash. These three KPIs are the mantra for any supply chain organization. Plus, of course, on top of all of this is sales, right? Because supply chain is serving sales to get the product out the door to the patient. So when you talk to a supply chain leader, they're wired to think this network approach, how is it going to improve service, sales, cost, and cash? If the answer to that question is clear, you got their attention. If not, they're going to spend their time on their ERP integration because everybody's investing triple-digit billions of dollars, at least large companies, to get to one ERP. Why? Because executives, I think, truly believe that this whole network approach and exchanging data is going to be realizing its full potential only when they get on one big fat ERP system. My view is that that's farthest from the truth, right?
Correct.
Being to one big ERP has nothing to do with the network exchange. So that's one part of the problem, right? So we have to continue to advocate for ROI, ROI, ROI. The goals that you work hard every single day and your teams work hard for, you can blow it out of the water if you took a network approach. So we have to evangelize that. The other part to this, I think, is that going back to my point-to-point connection discussion, if executives in supply chain feel that to get to a true network approach, they have to spend $100,000 per point-to-point connection to just get data from one ERP to another ERP, why? I mean, I'm fine spending $10,000 and have somebody email someone else or call them to get a PDF and have the people enter it into the ERP system. Why would I spend 10x, right? It's all connected again to the value. So it's easier to do the manual data exchange than do the integration. So we have to make these integrations achievable and reachable. The other big aspect to all of this is what you said. It's not just the point-to-point integration. It's how are you going to collaborate back and forth at a network level? Because supply chains, I don't think people really understand this. More than any function in the world is interdependencies from end to beginning. You want to improve your service level, you may have to increase your inventory, your cash on hand, and you may have to increase your cost, right? You want to get the product faster to patients, you may have to look at your manufacturing, frozen horizon. Every single thing you touch in supply chain parameter is going to affect other parameters. So incredible interdependencies. So if you're just thinking about point-to-point connections, you're going to miss the boat on the interdependencies and the latencies that come along with it. So long story long, what has to happen is, sort of not a business to business approach, but a business to network approach, where each business can say, here I am in my bubble, and rather than make point to point all over the place, I'm going to do a business to network connection so that the information that I get and collect with low latency can talk to each other along with other enterprise systems like planning systems and so on and so forth to bring the full picture together. So I know I've said a lot. Let me pause there and see what you think.
Well, I just remember in the 1980s, there was improvement in networks when we had significant brand owners push the adoption of networks. So Gillette, for example, before the acquisition of Procter & Gamble, was very active in a network process called CPFR. And the VMI efforts in that period of time, but VMI only connected at the order level. And I can't find anybody that uses VMI as a demand signal. And CPFR was flawed because our downstream partners didn't always have the best forecast, and we didn't test that. But at this point in time, I see no brand owner really pressing for the network effect. I see an absence in the industry across all of the industries where people are kind of like penguins on an iceberg waiting for others to jump, versus a brand owner who says, I'm going to take this problem and I'm going to lead the industry. I'm going to basically go where others don't go. How do we break that cycle of following versus leading? Because only 7% of companies are innovators, and I don't see any big brand pushing network approaches.
Yeah, that's a fair observation, Laura, and it goes back to what I won't repeat, which is the challenge with all the drug shortages, the opportunity with connecting to the partners to get a competitive advantage, and also this COVID-driven push. So I feel that there is progress, but I think it's all about the ROI. I'm sorry to sound very KPI oriented, but when you show these companies the business opportunity, I think they will follow. Let me give you one example, right? We speak about network. If you were to ask me, Laura, what has TraceLink achieved with this so-called network that's not possible within the ERP? One big example is last year, we started predicting drug shortages 90 days before they happened. And we protected north of 500,000, 500,000 patients from shortages. It's the best work I've done in my life. I don't think I'll ever work on anything that I'm more proud of, because it's patients like you and me. How did that happen? Did it happen inside the four walls within an ERP? No. It happened because TraceLink looked at the network and the supply chain and product movement across the network, anonymized and aggregated the insights to say, hey, at a network level, we're seeing supply and demand patterns that's indicative of shortages happened over the past 10 years, which we've analyzed with our AI algorithms. And now as these patterns start to emerge, we're applying deep learning and machine learning to predict the future. If somebody had come to me when I was at Merck and said, I can predict drug shortages, I would have laughed them off. Like, yeah, right. How do you do that? Even predicting weather is hard. But the point I'm trying to make is that when executives see the real possibilities, when you work at a network level, they will start to engage, right? So we have to show them real world examples, not PowerPoint, not make believe, not aspirational visions, but we couldn't predict shortages as an industry. And we're still early in the journey. You could ask the question, well, then why were so many drug shortages last year? Because we're still very young and early in our journey. But as we start to do things that couldn't be done before with the network approach, it's going to get people to engage. So that's my strongest belief, is the results and the value will bring more people into it. This cannot be a push approach. We cannot push the network approach on people. It's got to be a pull. Executives have to come to us to say, hey, show me how I can tap into my network. So how do we get to this pull versus push model is going to be the challenge over the next few years.
Well, and I look forward to working with you on the journey. Any last minute thoughts, Bharath, before we close here?
Well, I'll just say one thing, Laura, is look, we all say patient-centric, patient backward, patient this, patient that, but it's happening more in PowerPoint than in reality. Not because people don't have the intention of being patient-centric, because ultimately all of us are patients, right? We all are patients of something. We're consuming some kind of medicine. So the intent is there. The opportunity to digitize and take a network approach is there. But I just encourage people, your audience, to keep an open mind to explore possibilities. Because if you just keep doing what you've always been comfortable doing, meaning I'll just throw every time, effort, energy into the big bang ERP, once I get to one big ERP, that glorious utopian day comes, and then boom, my supply chain is going to be on fire. It won't be. You know that, Laura. I know that. We've been there through these painful journeys, but there is not a magical day that's going to solve all your supply chain problems when you get on one ERP. And it doesn't need to cost millions and millions of dollars to transform your supply chain to go outside and as opposed to inside out. You just have to take the effort. So my plea to your audience is reach out to Laura, reach out to me. We're happy to talk to them. But if we can engage and open up, I think possibilities are there. So that's my closing thought.
Well, we also have a Network of Network share group if anyone wants to join it, where we're talking about this. I think that not only did we go to sleep with enterprise resource planning and focus on the enterprise, but recently there's been a focus on risk and resilience without really embracing from the customer's customer to the supplier's supplier and bidirectional flow. So Bharath, thanks for joining us today, and it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.